"Watch it, you old black man," one of the teens sneered, deliberately shoving James Carter, a 90-year-old black veteran, so hard that he staggered off the curb, nearly plunging into the busy street. Car horns blared in the chaos. James, who'd earned medals in 3 brutal wars, caught himself, his heart hammering, not from fright but from the cold rage surging through him. The gang of teenagers just laughed, slapping each other on the back with cruel glee before strutting away. 20 minutes later, still basking in their sadistic prank in a nearby alley, their path was suddenly blocked by 2 U.S. Marine uniforms and the crisp, measured footsteps of many more young Marines behind them. James Carter trudged slowly down familiar Maple Street. The autumn sun cast a golden glow over the scattered maple leaves, creating a scene both serene and picture-perfect. Each of his steps was deliberate, his worn wooden cane tapping the pavement in a steady, rhythmic click. There was a distant melancholy in James's gaze. Those eyes had witnessed too much loss and suffering across 3 major American wars: World War II, the Korean War, and the hellish battlefields of Vietnam. He'd faced death, been wounded, and watched comrades fall beside him. Yet the deepest scars weren't from bullets or shrapnel. They were from the prejudice he'd endured all his life. For James, his daily walk to the little bakery on the corner wasn't just routine. It was a simple pleasure in his twilight years. A small apple pie, a hot cup of coffee, those few comforts soothed him after decades of sacrifice and endurance. But today's peaceful afternoon was about to be shattered. Just a few steps from the bakery, James spotted a group of 5 white teenagers loitering by the entrance. Their loud laughter and brazen attitudes were all too familiar to the neighbors. Tall, strapping, dressed in shabby streetwear, they exuded defiance and contempt in every glance and grin. James hesitated. He wasn't afraid, but he knew all too well the hostile looks and jeering slurs these kids reserved for him. Normally, he'd step onto the opposite sidewalk to avoid confrontation. Yet today, his aching joints made detours painful, and he silently asked himself why he should keep yielding to such senseless cruelty. Mustering his courage, James cleared his throat in a respectful, measured tone. "Excuse me, young men. May I pass, please?" Tyler Evans, the tallest of the group, wearing his baseball cap backwards, turned to James with blatant scorn. His cold blue eyes roamed over the old veteran from head to toe before he spat out, "Old man, you can't see the other side? Or are you too senile to know where you're going?" The others burst into mocking laughter, their jeers echoing with derision. A sharp pang shot through James's chest. He'd fought for freedom and equality, shed blood to protect people like these, and now here he was, standing in their way, humiliated by the very youth he'd once defended. Still, James kept his composure. "I only want to get into the bakery. It'll take a few seconds. Won't bother you." Tyler stepped forward, his disdain growing more pronounced. His voice hushed but menacing, he said, "Listen, old black man, this isn't your place. Best you move along, or else—" He let the threat hang in the air. The atmosphere grew suffocatingly tense. Passers-by glanced over, but no one dared intervene. James felt his heart tighten. He'd heard this hateful rhetoric too many times, and each instance cut deeper than the last. Yet he refused to back down now. He straightened his back a bit more, his voice calm yet firm. "I just want to go into the bakery. A few seconds, that's all." Tyler sneered, a cruel smile crossing his lips. Without warning, he lunged, ramming his shoulder into James. The old man lost his footing, his cane skittering across the pavement as he pitched forward into the onrushing traffic. Car horns shrieked in panic. Through the chaos, James caught sight of Tyler's satisfied, malicious grin, mirrored by his friends who laughed triumphantly behind him. In that moment, all James felt was searing indignation. A wound deeper than any battlefield injury, the sting of contempt and racial hatred. His peaceful afternoon had been shattered in the most brutal way. "Watch it, you old black man," Tyler Evans sneered, his voice dripping with contempt as he leaned back, arms folded, eyes cold as they bored into James. Even after nearly being crushed by traffic, saved only by the instincts of a seasoned soldier, James Carter's patience and civility felt stretched to their breaking point. Tyler, the ringleader, stood there all swagger, surveying James from head to toe as if etching his frailty into his mind. His steely gray-blue gaze held both challenge and the unspoken hatred society had fed into these arrogant kids. "Wow, you're tougher than I thought, old man," Tyler taunted, voice laced with sarcasm. "Veteran, huh? Should have folded up shop 40 years ago." His friends, bunched up like a wall behind him, erupted in laughter. Billy, the redhead, whistled mockingly. "What's next? Gonna show us some battlefield roll and dodge moves right here on the sidewalk?" Brandon, Tyler's loyal sidekick, shouted over the noise so the whole block could hear. "Careful there, old man. The combat zone here is this gutter, not some desert or jungle." Hostility and scorn thickened the air. Under their jeers, James felt the emptiness in Tyler's stare, an emptiness born of contempt, of trampling another's dignity just to prove false superiority. Slowly, James bent and retrieved his cane, gripping it not as a weapon, but for reassurance. Memories of his service flashed back, the shared rations, the nightly shelter beside brothers in arms of every color, the frozen nights in foxholes. Yet here, on his own homeland streets, he was nothing but old black man to these kids, their derision as painful as any battlefield wound. "I'm just asking for a bit of space to get into the bakery," James said, his voice low but clear. "I don't want trouble or to teach anyone a lesson. I just believe every one of us deserves respect, young or old." Tyler snorted and beckoned his gang with a dismissive flick. "Respect? You want respect from us? You think your veteran's card or those rusty medals make you better than anybody?" He took a step closer, lowering his voice to a cold whisper meant only for James. "Let me tell you something, old black man. You ain't nothing here. The older you get, the more worthless you become. We, younger, white, are the future. Got it?" His words cut deep, reopening wounds James thought had healed long ago. Wounds from even his fellow soldiers who once doubted him because of his skin. He'd known that gaze and tone before, but never felt it sting so sharply as hearing it from these kids, in a society that claimed to have moved forward. The tension was suffocating. Storefront windows snapped shut. Passers-by glanced over, then hurried off, leaving James alone facing naked hostility. In his eyes there was no fear, only sorrow, disappointment, and a quiet rage held back all his life. Tyler squinted, lips curling into a cruel grin. "So you want us to move? Go on, crawl through if you've got the guts." Tyler and his friends formed a blockade, legs propped on benches, shutting off the bakery door as if declaring war on the last shred of dignity James possessed. James straightened his shoulders and met Tyler's gaze. Inside him, the blood of a soldier who once stood under fire to defend justice and freedom began to boil. Never before had an ordinary afternoon on this quiet street felt so charged with threat and animosity. The tense silence between James and the teens stretched on for several more seconds, every glance and gesture like a spark ready to ignite a wildfire. Tyler, still smirking defiantly, not only refused to make way, but deliberately escalated the threat. He stepped back as if directing the petty violence he'd scripted for himself. "All right, you want to test yourself?" Tyler yelled, making sure everyone around could hear, then shot a quick look at his friends for encouragement. Their mocking laughter and prodding nudges only fed his arrogance. James fought to remain calm, gripping his wooden cane as he prepared to step past their barricade of legs. He knew one wrong move could cost him dearly: his health, his honor. But to back down would be to accept their trampling of his dignity, something he refused at any age. Tyler glanced down at his feet, then his eyes glittered with mischief. He waited until James lifted his foot to step forward, then suddenly swung his leg out to block him. At the same moment, what looked like a light tap on the shoulder turned into a deliberate shove, far stronger than you'd expect from a seemingly harmless 20-year-old. "Careful, old man," Tyler sneered. No concern in his voice, only malicious delight. James was knocked off balance. His frail legs wobbled on the narrow sidewalk. His cane slipped from his hand, and he staggered backward, shoulder slamming into a cold metal bench. Right then, a gray sedan roared past the curb, its brakes shrieking in panic. It all happened in the blink of an eye. Chaos exploded around him, blaring horns, terrified screams from bystanders, the cacophony stretching endlessly in James's head. For a moment, he felt suspended between life and death. Every soldier's reflex surged back. He gritted his teeth and twisted, using the last of his strength to avoid the oncoming wheel, then rolled toward the edge of the curb. Behind him, Tyler and his friends still cackled. Not carefree child's laughter, but the sound of cold indifference and unpunished cruelty. Tyler clapped his hands and addressed the group. "See that? He's got more moves than I thought. Guess the old man still thinks he's on the battlefield." Billy, Brandon, and the other teens joined in, laughing even louder, paying no mind to the danger that just passed or the angry glares from nearby neighbors. Onlookers remained silent. Some wanted to help, but were stopped by fear or hesitation. Meanwhile, Tyler and his gang strutted about proudly, as if they'd achieved some heroic victory in their cruel game. They reveled in having taught that old black man a lesson, never realizing that their actions had dishonored themselves and their community. James, hands trembling, retrieved his cane from where it had landed. His legs still shook, but his eyes burned with both pain and a long-suppressed fury. He quietly brushed the dust off his clothes, said nothing, but in his mind vowed, this time, he would not let it end in silence. The quiet peace of this small street had been shattered by a malicious shove, one that not only harmed a vulnerable veteran's body, but also reopened the wounds of an entire generation who'd once stood bravely for justice, only to be mocked and trampled on their own soil. Before the dust even settled, James Carter gripped his cane so tightly his frail hands shook, and yet the resolve of a veteran forged in fire wouldn't let him fall. His eyes, blurred with age but still sharp as ever, had stared down death too many times to yield now. In that split second, reflexes honed on battlefields kicked in. He twisted aside, dodging the tire by inches, and caught himself on the curb before the traffic could sweep him away. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from a deep, rising fury. What had just happened wasn't an accident. It was an insult, a deliberate act of cruelty meant to humiliate a man who'd spent his life fighting for freedom and equality. Yet, while James gasped for breath, fighting to steady himself, Tyler Evans and his friends stood there on the sidewalk, wholly unrepentant. The pale autumn light highlighted every cruel smirk and empty gaze. Tyler crossed his arms, a smug half-smile playing on his lips, eyes glittering with triumph. "He's pretty spry, isn't he?" Tyler shouted so the whole block could hear. "Maybe when we're his age we'll still be able to run like that." Billy, Brandon and the rest erupted in cold, knife-like laughter. Not one of them flinched at the memory of nearly pushing an old man into oncoming traffic. To them, it was nothing more than mindless fun, a break from the boredom of a lazy afternoon. A young woman passing by stopped as if to help James, but Tyler's menacing glare sent her hurrying away, clutching the child at her side and throwing James a single, helpless look of pity. James stood perfectly still, the cane shaking in his grasp, not just from the fall, but from the sting of shame. Memories flooded back of being shoved aside and sneered at for the color of his skin, even as he wore the uniform and the medals he'd earned. Tyler resumed his performance, as if the whole scene were a comedy. "So, old man, enjoy being the center of attention? Want to give it another go?" he jeered. The gang howled with laughter again, blind to the despair and barely contained rage in James's eyes. The cruelty of youth, fueled by groupthink, had erased every moral boundary. For Tyler, this was a moment to flaunt power, to impress his friends with a false sense of superiority born of cowardice. The street fell silent, but for the kids' echoing laughter, James's ragged breathing, and a few scattered uneasy glances from onlookers. Maple Street's once peaceful calm lay shattered by a vicious shove, and now by the cruel indifference of those too young to grasp the value of human dignity. Deep inside, James felt something change. He knew that if he simply endured this in silence, such cruelty would grow unchecked, turned again on other vulnerable victims, other veterans of color, other innocent people. A fierce determination ignited in his eyes. His heart still thundered, but now it beat with resolve. He would not let this atrocity be forgotten. The cruel laughter of the teens hadn't even died down when a woman on the far side of the street, her brown hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck, darted across. It was Linda Martin, a familiar face on Maple Street, always helping the elderly, always the first to speak up when she saw injustice. She hurried to James's side, her worried eyes sweeping over his lined, weary face. Still trembling from the shove, he leaned on his cane and slowly straightened, shoulders quivering, back a little more bent than usual. Gently, Linda laid a hand on his arm, her voice trembling with concern and anger both. "Mr. Carter, are you all right? Those kids were awful. Do you need me to call an ambulance?" James forced a weak smile, far more fragile than his usual calm. He shook his head and sighed, his voice carried on the dust of time. "Thank you, Linda. I'm just a bit stunned. I've been through worse than this more times than I can count." Linda drew another breath. Her compassion softened, but her gaze hardening as she turned toward the departing teens. She opened her mouth to scold them, but Tyler had already backed off, raising his hands in a mocking shrug before he and his friends stomped away, still jeering without so much as a backward glance. Their shadows stretched across the sidewalk in distorted streaks, as if the cruelty, the coldness, and the indifference they carried had its own twisted shape, lingering here through the years. Gently, Linda guided James to sit on a nearby park bench, quietly waiting as he caught his breath. But she didn't yet know that the deepest wound he felt wasn't from the fall, nor from bruises on flesh long accustomed to injury. It was an invisible wound, the humiliation and profound blow to his dignity, the proud heart trampled without mercy. Staring into space, James felt himself drift far from Maple Street. Memories, old, painful memories, flooded back, vivid as though they'd happened yesterday. He remembered the first time a white officer ordered him out of the whites-only mess hall on base. He recalled the loneliness of wearing a U.S. Marine Corps uniform, yet still being treated as an outsider in his own unit. In his youth, James had believed, if I fight bravely enough, if I sacrifice enough, people will respect me, will treat me as a true American. Life, however, was never that simple. Despite medals and battlefield honors, he'd returned home to suspicious glances and whispered slurs, simply because of his skin. He'd seen a fellow black soldier doused with water and insulted at a victory celebration, been refused service at a restaurant, forced to wait in the rain like any second-class citizen, found hate mail slipped under his door warning that not everyone wants a black Marine living here. Those memories, long buried, surged back to life at the memory of Tyler's smirk and cold laughter. Noticing James's distant expression, Linda squeezed his hand and whispered, "You don't deserve to be treated this way, Mr. Carter. No one does, especially someone who's given their life for this country." James nodded, grateful for her kindness, but deep inside his heart rose a wave of helplessness that weighed down his aging spirit. He wondered, what had all his sacrifices, those cold nights in foxholes, those brushes with death, really bought him? A quiet afternoon on a small street now felt like a luxury he could no longer afford, just because of the color of his skin. Far off, the teens had turned into a narrow alley, their laughter echoing behind them. But James barely heard it. His heart felt as cold as it had on the battlefields, except now his enemy wasn't a foreign soldier, but the hatred and indifference of his own country's next generation. He thought of his father, fired from a factory for demanding fair treatment for black workers, of his mother, who wept all night when he enlisted, proud yet terrified he'd never be accepted as an equal. Each generation had to brace itself to endure, hoping one day things would truly change. "Are you sure you don't need to go to the hospital?" Linda gently asked, pulling him back from his reverie. James shook his head once more. The fall was a mere scratch compared to what he'd lived through. He knew his body would heal, but the wound in his heart would smolder on. Until this society learned to see, to honor, and to protect the dignity of every person, regardless of the color of their skin. Linda took a tissue from her purse and dabbed at a scratch on his arm, her eyes full of compassion and helplessness. She wanted to offer stronger words of comfort, that society had come so far, that these kids were just bad apples in a good barrel. But today, she wasn't sure she believed that anymore, seeing so much apathy on Maple Street. James looked at her and managed a wry, heartfelt smile. He appreciated Linda's kindness, but he also realized he could no longer remain silent or patient. If he stayed quiet today, who else tomorrow would suffer this insult? How many more? Veterans like him, children like his mother, neighbors like Linda, would bear these invisible wounds. A fierce light sparked in his eyes, reignited by memories of old, the days when he was the soldier who dared stand up to injustice, whether under enemy fire or beneath the prejudice of his own countrymen. Silently, a new resolve took root in him amid the pain and shame. He would not let this happen again. He would not allow a single generation to believe that insulting, shoving, or discriminating against a black veteran was normal or without consequence. Beside him, Linda sat in quiet support, unaware that in James Carter's mind, a new fight had just begun, a fight to defend his dignity, the dignity of those who've suffered, and the promise of justice and change for all Americans. Next to the park bench, where Linda Martin still sat patiently, supporting his arm, James Carter stood in silence, staring at his scuffed shoes and frayed laces. The late autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pastries and the distant sound of children playing. But inside him, there was only loneliness, restlessness, and an ache he couldn't name. Silence. 2 words he'd known all his life. Silence in the face of scrutinizing stares at Southern bases. Silence outside whites-only barbershops. Silence when he was denied a post-war job because of the race box on his application. He understood that silence offered no protection, earned no respect. It only allowed injustice, violence, and prejudice to grow unchecked, choking out any hope for fairness. Linda's gentle gaze was laced with sorrow. She seemed to read the thoughts in James's mind, yet all she did was squeeze his shoulder to lend him strength. Her warm, brown eyes promised encouragement without a single word. "Are you really all right?" Linda asked, for the 3rd time in less than 10 minutes. James nodded, offering a quiet, subdued smile. But he knew. If he stayed silent today, tomorrow, other old men, other mothers, other black boys would become the next targets for another Tyler Evans. Silence was no longer an option for someone who once wore the Marine Corps uniform. He rose to his feet, his steps steadier, though his legs still trembled. Linda looked at him, surprised. "Do you want to go home, or should I take you to the police?" she asked. James shook his head, his eyes reflecting the resolve of a seasoned warrior. "No," he said, "I can't let this go as if nothing happened. Not this time, Linda. I won't be silent anymore." Linda gave him a soft smile, sensing the change in his voice. She knew this man, though aged, still carried the unbreakable spirit of a battle-hardened Marine. He wasn't standing up just for himself, but for all those who had spent their lives gritting their teeth, waiting for the respect they'd earned. James took a deep breath, gazing down the alley where Tyler Evans and his gang had disappeared. In that moment, he saw his fallen comrades, Black Marines who'd laid down their lives for this flag. They did not fight to return home only to be trampled, insulted, and dismissed on American streets. That thought rekindled his fire. A Marine never backs down from injustice. An old sergeant's words in Okinawa echoed in his mind. Today, James would not back down. He retrieved his battered cell phone from his jacket pocket, hands trembling slightly as he searched for the number of the local Marine Corps Center, the place he visited at every commemoration, where he was truly heard and honored as a living piece of Corps history. Linda watched, a mix of surprise and pride in her eyes. "Who are you calling, James?" she asked. He didn't answer at once, only offered a knowing smile before pressing send. The line connected quickly, with Sergeant Thomas Miller, who had shaken his hand warmly at last month's memorial. "Hello, Sergeant Miller. This is James Carter. Yes, me. The old guy you called tough as nails the other day." Miller recognized his voice and instantly adopted a respectful tone. "Mr. Carter, are you okay? How can I help?" James drew a steadying breath and recounted everything, from the hateful slurs and the shove that nearly killed him, to Tyler Evans's callous laughter and that of his friends. On the other end, Miller paused, then spoke firmly. "I'll take care of this. Here, we watch each other's backs. No one, especially a black veteran like you, should ever have to endure that in this country." James hung up, feeling his heartbeat calm, not the tight anger of before, but a warm determination urging him to stand his ground. At the far end of the street, the afternoon sun was fading, but in James's eyes a spark burned through the haze of memory and injustice. This time, he chose not to be silent. This time, he would make sure the community understood that discrimination and cruelty would no longer go unchallenged. Tyler Evans and his crew had turned the corner, still laughing. But James saw through their bravado. Their arrogance was a thin veil over cowardice and selfishness. They needed a lesson, not just for him, but for their own future. Linda laid a gentle hand on his shoulder, as if to say, I believe in you." And in her heart she felt a renewed hope that when one person dares to speak up and act, injustice, no matter how deeply rooted, can one day be uprooted. James stepped away from the bench with steady resolve. A new battle had begun. Not with rifles and bullets, but with unwavering courage, fierce determination, and an unyielding stand against injustice. As the last rays of the afternoon sun faded over the rooftops of Maple Street, James Carter stood motionless beneath the old catalpa tree, his hand still gripping the outdated cell phone. Linda Martin had just bid him goodbye, leaving his shoulder with a hopeful reminder, "Believe that justice still exists, James." He lingered for a few moments, feeling the early winter chill seep between his fingers, and a resolve deeper and stronger than he'd felt since leaving the Corps. What Tyler Evans and his gang had done was far more than a cruel joke or youthful recklessness. It was contempt incarnate. A knife twisted into the pride and honor of a man who once carried the burden of defending his country. It was yet another scar on an entire generation of people of color who'd been disregarded and demeaned despite their sacrifices. In the distance, James could still see the teens lingering at the corner of the alley, their jeers echoing with the clatter of bottles tossed into a dumpster and occasional profanity ringing in the crisp air. It reminded him of darker days, the young Marine dragged out of the mess hall as a mockery, ridiculed for daring to be proud of his skin and his uniform. Today was the same scenario on his own soil, but he'd made up his mind not to back down. He slowly punched in the number for the Marine Corps recruiting station on Main Street. The phone rang steadily, each ring bolstering his determination. A firm, decisive voice answered, Sergeant Thomas Miller, a man respected in their community not just for discipline, but for his deep regard for veterans, especially those who'd suffered racial injustice. Marine Corps Recruiting Station, Sergeant Miller speaking. James cleared his throat and spoke as calmly as he could, though his pulse still fluttered. "Hello, Sergeant Miller. This is James Carter. I'm not sure if you remember me. I'm the Marine veteran you met at the September commemoration." Instantly, Miller's tone warmed and grew solemn. "Mr. Carter, of course I remember you, the fellow who served on 3 major fronts and inspired so many recruits here. What can I do for you?" James paused to choose his words carefully, each one clipped and precise, as if delivering a formal report. A group of teenagers blocked my path, insulted me, and shoved me to the ground. Their slurs were clearly racially motivated. They mocked me for being black and for my military service. The worst was when their leader, Tyler Evans, hurled me into the street, nearly getting me run over. I'm not badly hurt, but being trampled like that, it felt as if my years of sacrifice meant nothing. Sergeant, I cannot stay silent about this. On the other end, Miller was silent for a heartbeat, his breathing echoing resolve. "Sir, where are you now? Are they still around?" James pointed them out. "They're still in the alley behind Maple Bakery at the corner. I think they'll stick around. It's their turf." Miller's voice sharpened like a bugle call. "Thank you for letting me know, Mr. Carter. Harassing a veteran, especially a black Marine, is unforgivable. I'll be there with a few Marines in a few minutes. Stay put and don't engage them. You'll have the respect you deserve in the name of the Corps." He hung up, letting out a breath that steadied his racing heart. He knew that if he stayed silent, this would vanish like so many past slights he'd endured, never wanting to make a fuss. But this time, he'd spoken out. This time marked a new beginning, not just for him, but for the whole community. The teens, oblivious to the incoming support, were still lounging in the alley. Tyler Evans slouched on a stone bench, his foot propped up, twisting a soda can as if celebrating his victory. glowing with the unrepentant arrogance of pampered youth. Brandon and Billy, his sidekicks, laughed as they rehashed James's near-fatal stumble, mimicking his voice in cruel mockery. Guess the old guy thought he was back on the battlefield. Thank God nobody filmed it, otherwise TikTok would have eaten it up. Their malice hung heavy in the dim glow of the street lamp. The teens like ghosts, unaware of the line they'd crossed from prank to crime, from excitement to cruelty. Meanwhile, James sat quietly on the park bench, spine straight, eyes fixed ahead. His shoulders tremored, not from fear, but from the knowledge that many others like him, black veterans, had spent their lives suffering in silence. Today, though, thanks to a single choice, everything had changed. Soon, the measured cadence of Marine boots would echo down the sidewalk. The men who had sworn to uphold the Corps' honor were on their way, and this time, James Carter would not stand alone. The moment James Carter's call ended, Sergeant Thomas Miller stood silent in the small office of the Marine Corps recruiting station, his fists clenched tight. Behind him on the wall hung photos of veterans, white, black, Latinx, Asian, all once bound by the same oath to defend America's honor and freedom. Their eyes, frozen in silver frames, reminded Miller of his solemn duty not just to the Corps, but to the justice every uniformed man and woman deserves. Without hesitation, Miller strode into the hallway. A single, sharp command halted the young Marines in their tracks as they finished physical training in the yard. Heads snapped to attention, awaiting orders. "Marines!" One of our veterans was attacked and insulted by a group of teenagers on Maple Street. This is more than bullying. It's an assault on a veteran's honor, a racist affront, and an attack on the spirit of our Corps. We will not tolerate it, now or ever. The atmosphere changed instantly. The once boisterous recruits went stone silent, faces hardening with righteous anger. To them, James Carter wasn't just some old man, he was a living symbol of pride, a reminder of battlefield sacrifices, proof that strength can overcome prejudice to build the Corps we serve today. Miller nodded to two junior sergeants, Harris and Rodriguez, signaling them to join. 6 privates, only 18 or in their early 20s but forged in strict discipline, fell in beside him, checked their uniforms, eyes fixed on their senior. Within a minute, a compact, resolute detachment stood ready, exuding stern authority. "Move out," Miller ordered. The formation marched smartly down Main Street toward the alley James had described. En route, Miller briefed them crisply. 3 key points: an attack on a veteran, unmistakable racial bigotry, and their role not merely to reprimand but to set an example for the entire community, even those bystanders who'd silently watched. Meanwhile, in the alley behind the bakery, Tyler Evans and his friends remained blissfully unaware of what approached. They clustered around a battered dumpster, laughing as they rehashed James's near miss with passing cars. Billy, the group's braggart, pulled out his phone, flicked open TikTok, and taunted, "Hey, if he'd really gotten hit, would anyone tell the newspapers, or would it just be another viral meme?" Tyler swaggered, worry nowhere on his face. In his mind, they were untouchable here. This is our street, he believed, and that conviction fed his arrogance. Brandon nodded in agreement, glancing nervously over his shoulder to see if anyone had overheard them. Deep down, he felt uneasy, but fear of being branded a traitor kept him silent. Groupthink had stripped each of them of conscience and compassion. They all knew their deed was cruel, but none dared speak up first. Then came the precise echo of boots on pavement. Tyler looked up and saw a small formation approaching, not in haste, but with such quiet confidence that even sunlight fading over olive-green uniforms seemed respectful. Marine Corps insignia gleamed in the orange dusk. Leading the squad was Sergeant Miller, broad-shouldered, stern-faced, projecting the unmistakable aura of a man who would brook no disrespect, least of all toward a fellow veteran. Beside him, Harris and Rodriguez strode forward, 6 young privates behind them, each purposeful step reaffirming that here, order and honor were non-negotiable. Tyler raised an eyebrow, lips curling in defiance, though a flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. He glanced at Billy and Brandon, noting their sudden stiffness. But pride wouldn't let him show fear. "What's this about?" "You military types coming to teach a bunch of kids a lesson," Tyler called out, voice cracking slightly. Miller said nothing at first. He simply faced the teens, his eyes cutting into each of them like a razor. He saw their bravado, their awkward guilt, and he knew his mission was more than rebuke. It was to protect an unwavering value. After a pregnant pause, Miller spoke in a deep, resonant tone. "No one here has the right to insult a veteran's honor, nor to mock age or skin color. You may think you are strong, but you know nothing of real strength, the strength of sacrifice, of honor, of respecting those who paved the way for you." The air itself seemed to still. Each word rang like a drumbeat through the narrow alley, touching the dormant conscience of every teenager present. Tyler tried to laugh it off, but his hand trembled slightly. In that charged moment, 2 generations, reckless, selfish youth versus disciplined defenders of justice, stood locked in a silent showdown. And what awaited Tyler Evans and his friends wasn't just a lecture. It was a lesson in respect, the consequences of cruelty, and the power of a community that refuses to remain silent. The alley, once alive with taunts, jeers, and the raucous energy of Tyler Evans's crew, suddenly grew thick with an unspoken unease. Each measured step of Marine boots on the gray cobblestones rang out clear and firm, a herald of an entirely new order closing in. It had been only 10 minutes since James Carter placed his call to Sergeant Miller. Now the Marines were here, efficient, disciplined, and utterly silent in their approach. They didn't need raised voices or displays of force. Their very bearing and the quiet authority in their posture told everyone. These were men forged in iron discipline, unconstrained by wickedness or disrespect. Tyler sat perched on an old railing, swinging his legs, oblivious until Billy hissed in panic, "Hey, look over there." Brandon turned, and instantly felt that chill of pressure emanating from the alley's far end. 6 young Marines, flanked by 2 sergeants, stood blocking every exit. Sergeant Miller anchored the center like a steel gate lowered to seal off escape routes. In an instant, Tyler's cocky grin vanished. His face shifted from mockery to confusion, then to outright fear. Moments ago, he had been the little king of Maple Street. Now that false throne collapsed like sandcastles in a rising tide. Billy, Brandon, Kevin, and Ryan froze too. Their laughter and swagger drained away as they realized this prank wasn't some harmless pastime. No one spoke. Fear and shame spoke in every tremor and dart of their eyes. Miller took no immediate step forward. Instead, he signaled to the 2 Marines at the alley's mouth to hold fast while he and the other sergeants walked in calmly, their gazes sweeping each face as though reading souls. In those steel-gray eyes lay more than military authority. There was disappointment and pity for these lost youths. The alley fell utterly silent, save for the teens' ragged breathing and pounding hearts. Tyler scowled at Brandon, searching for support, but found only bowed heads, clenched fists, and sweat on nervous brows. Billy tried to muster a joke, but his laughter came out strained and hollow. "Sir, is something wrong?" Billy stammered, voice shaking as he forced a casual tone. Miller's reply was as cold as it was firm. "There is no sir or kid today, only discipline, truth, and consequences for your actions." Those words cut through every pretense, shredded the illusion of their survival of the fittest mindset. The teens huddled closer, their pack instinct now stripped to raw fear, not of muscle, but of the unwavering resolve and dignity before them. Sergeant Rodriguez, stepping forward, his voice steel-plated, demanded, "Who shoved Mr. Carter into traffic?" Tyler swallowed hard, took a half-step back, opened his mouth to deny, then realized every accusing eye was locked on him. He knew there was no escape. Their secret needed no confession. He was the obvious culprit. We were just kidding," Tyler mumbled, eyes cast downward. Sergeant Harris cut in, low but commanding. "A joke?" Pushing down an elderly black veteran nearly to his death. "Your idea of a joke? Do you even know what he's done for this country and for the freedoms you enjoy?" Miller's gaze never wavered from Tyler as he asked in cutting precision, "Do you understand what honor means? Do you comprehend the value of respect and the cost of indifference?" Tyler's hands shook as a whirlwind of confusion, shame, anger, and finally real fear roiled within him. He'd always relied on others looking away. Today, for the first time, he'd crossed a line he could not uncross, the line of honor, the line of the eternal Marine tradition. No punches needed. The Marines' power lay in their discipline, their conviction in right, and above all, their reverence for those who came before. For Tyler and his friends, this was a revelation, intimidating, unforgettable. In that small alley, the Marines' sudden appearance dissolved all false hierarchies, leaving behind in Tyler Evans' group a deeper fear than any corporal's reprimand, the fear of confronting themselves, the real consequences of cruelty, and the might of a community that will no longer stand silent in the face of injustice. In the narrow alley that had long been Tyler Evans's territory, every sound seemed to fade under the crushing weight of tension. These teens, accustomed to unchecked freedom, were experiencing a relentless pressure for the first time. Not from shouting, but from the calm, unwavering presence of the Marines surrounding them. Sergeant Thomas Miller stood at the center, imposing and silent. He didn't need to yell, brandish weapons, or issue threats. His very posture conveyed the authority of a leader who'd faced real danger. Around him, Corporals Harris and Rodriguez and 6 young privates formed an unbreakable human barrier, sealing off every escape route. Tyler Evans, once the fearless ringleader, now stood frozen, hands clammy, fingers entwined in a vain attempt at composure. Billy, Brandon, Kevin, and Ryan exchanged nervous glances, their usual swagger drained away. Breaking the silence, Miller's deep voice resonated through the cramped alley, mere feet above their heads, yet echoing straight to their hearts. "You may think you're powerful, free to do anything because no one's ever stopped you. You're wrong. Real strength isn't youth, numbers, or muscle. Real strength is knowing when to stop, taking responsibility for your actions, and most importantly, respecting others." He fixed Tyler with a piercing stare. "What did you do today? Was it a harmless prank, or the cowardly act of people too afraid to face their own weakness? You shoved an elderly man, an old veteran who sacrificed his youth for this country, nearly into oncoming traffic, all for your amusement. That wasn't a joke. It was cowardice, a crime, and a stain on your character." Billy stammered, ashamed. We just thought he'd be okay." Harris interjected sharply. "Okay? Do you realize how many people die after being pushed to the ground? How many lives are destroyed by one person's momentary cruelty? That's a human life, dignity, Honor. Rodriguez's voice rang with disappointment. You think skin color gives you the right to mock and humiliate someone, especially a veteran in uniform who protected you and your families. Generations fought and died so you could grow up free and choose your own path, and this is how you repay them. Tyler lowered his head, biting his lip, eyes averted. A hollow shame welled inside him for the first time, a shame that stripped away his arrogance and revealed his fear of appearing weak before his peers. Miller stepped forward, his tone unwavering, each word heavier than the last. Today, you may think you won by scaring an old man, but you lost. You made yourselves smaller, more cowardly in the eyes of this community. No one here would stand proud of what you did. He lifted a hand to the Marine emblem on his chest. This symbol stands for honor and responsibility. We, white, black, Latinx, and Asian, live by one principle. No one gets left behind, no one gets degraded for their age or the color of their skin. That spirit built this country, forged Marines like us, and defines veterans like James Carter, whom you just insulted. A tense moment passed, broken only by the teens' ragged breaths and the wind howling down the alley. Billy's voice trembled as he asked, barely above a whisper, "Are we going to be arrested?" Miller held his gaze, his words deliberate and clear. That depends on how you respond today. You can keep denying and blaming each other, carrying this shame forever. Or you can own your actions, apologize to Mr. Carter in front of this community, and learn what it means to be real men. Men who take responsibility and make amends. We'll be watching the choice you make. His challenge hung in the air, an opening for anyone brave enough to confront their own mistakes. In Miller's eyes and those of the Marines, there was judgment, yes, but also a spark of hope that these kids might truly change. It was a lesson they'd never forget, not taught with lashings, but with the power of pride, tradition, and the indomitable Marine spirit. Wherever justice and honor stand, evil will never prevail. When Sergeant Miller's steady, resonant words finally faded, the small alley fell into a silence as heavy as the coming winter air. Talk of honor, consequences, and respect was no longer distant theory. It had cut into each teen's mind like a blade, especially Tyler Evans, once proud of his youthful bravado and authority, now feeling smaller than ever. He slowly lifted his head and took in the faces of the Marines. No one sneered or reveled in their fear. They simply stood there, steadfast walls of justice and dignity. Their calm resolve only deepened Tyler's shame. His old pride crumbled, revealing an emptiness and regret he could no longer deny. Billy, Brandon, Kevin, and Ryan looked equally chastened. Billy stared down at his scuffed shoes, hands trembling. Brandon glanced at Miller, then looked away, lips pressed tight as though wanting to speak, but unable. The cruel jokes of just hours ago had turned into painful memories no one wanted to revisit. Miller stepped forward, his gaze softening just a fraction, but retaining its gravity. "Do you understand? We're not here to bully you or to get revenge. But you must learn this. Every action carries consequences. Honor, compassion, and respect, those are the foundations of maturity and of being true American citizens. Tomorrow, when you look back on today, remember, anyone can make mistakes, but only those who own up to them truly grow." No one answered. Tyler bit his lip, swallowed hard, a tide of remorse surging in him. All his excuses and defenses suddenly rang hollow before the eyes of soldiers who'd held fast to their principles under fire. He saw again James Carter's face, hurt, wounded pride, crushed dignity, and realized he'd humiliated not just an old man, but a whole generation that sacrificed for his freedom. Billy's voice cracked. I'm sorry. We were wrong." Those words, small as they were, became the beginning of change. One by one, hesitant apologies followed, not in unison, no longer defiant but honest. They looked at Miller, Harris, Rodriguez, the young Marines, and at one another, not to seek solidarity, but to muster the courage to face their own failings. Miller nodded and motioned for the Marines to step back. No more lectures were needed. Silence returned, but it was no longer a frozen wall of hostility. It was a space for remorse, reflection, and growth. Tyler Evans was the first to emerge from the alley, shoulders shaking, steps unsteady. He dared not meet anyone's eyes, focusing instead on each breath and each step. Billy and Brandon followed, faces still shadowed by shame. Kevin and Ryan trailed in silence. Each carried a new burden. Not fear of punishment, but the weight of lost self-respect and human dignity. At the street's entrance, the teens parted ways wordlessly, heading home in quiet, avoiding the watchful gazes of Maple Street's residents. The same neighbors who once averted their eyes, now looking on with surprise, pity, and a touch of relief. Behind them, the Marines still stood in the alley, their posture unwavering, a living symbol of justice, faith, and American pride. Miller exhaled, knowing today's confrontation had etched an indelible lesson into those young souls, a lesson in ethics, in respect, the cost of bigotry, and above all, the true power of a community when good people refuse to stay silent. Across the street, James Carter sat on the park bench, watching the teens' retreating figures. He saw the change in their posture. No more swagger, only hesitation and thoughtfulness. A gentle, thoughtful smile spread across his weathered face. Hopeful, despite everything. Because sometimes the deepest wounds aren't on the skin but in the soul. And when those wounds are acknowledged and healed with sincerity, they can become the very force that drives growth and a better future. As darkness settled over Maple Street, Tyler Evans and his friend's hesitant footsteps faded around the corner. An uncanny stillness took hold. Only the wind whispering through the tree canopy, distant car horns, and the soft glow of a street lamp falling across the bench where James Carter sat, his aged eyes reflecting a life's worth of memories. James never took his gaze from the alley's gate, the very spot that had been the stage for hatred and insult just minutes before. Now, he felt an undefinable emotion, like emerging from his deepest sorrow while reclaiming a spark of the old courage and pride he once thought lost to time. At that moment, Sergeant Miller stepped out from the alley, his stride sure and steady, his stern countenance softened in respect. He halted before James and rendered a precise military salute. "Master Sergeant Carter, the incident has been addressed, sir." James rose, his frail frame straightening as best he could, legs shaky but eyes shining with pride. He returned the salute, not as a hollow formality, but with the profound respect, gratitude, and camaraderie that only those who've shared combat know. "Thank you, Sergeant Miller. Thank you and your men for being here today." Miller held James's gaze, his voice firm and sincere. "We merely did what needed doing. Here, a veteran's honor and dignity are never abandoned. Those who think they can insult another without consequence, even if they're young and ignorant of the cost, will always find someone to remind them of right and wrong. Today, we were proud to protect you, just as you once protected our nation." Those simple, genuine words resonated deeply with James. He remembered his first days in the Marine Corps, a 17-year-old black boy facing suspicion and discrimination, yet pressing on with a simple belief. His sacrifice and loyalty would one day be honored, if not now, then surely later. And now, in his 90s, standing in his hometown, he truly felt that honor, not through dusty old medals or grand ceremonies, but through the respectful salute and heartfelt gratitude of the next generation of Marines carrying the torch. James nodded, a long-lost pride swelling within him. Not for past glories, but because he understood. He was no longer alone in the fight against injustice. The courage, loyalty, and belief in righteousness he'd forged were now cherished, upheld, and carried forward by young men who would not remain silent. Miller offered a gentle smile. "Sir, do you need an escort home or any further assistance?" James shook his head, returning a warm smile as he looked down the street where Tyler and his crew had disappeared. "No, I'm fine. You've given me the greatest remedy any Marine could hope for: respect and trust. Keep doing what's right and let Maple Street remain a place of justice and unity." Miller rendered one final salute, then signaled his team to withdraw. The echo of disciplined footsteps rang on the sidewalk, leaving behind a peace that was no longer cold. It glowed with newfound hope. James settled back onto the bench, a rare tranquility in his heart. He knew tomorrow would bring fresh challenges, and there'd be other Tyler Evanses out there. But he also knew this: wherever justice lives, wherever people stand up for what's right, injustice will ultimately be defeated. A sliver of late-afternoon light brushed across James's silver head. He closed his eyes, feeling his heartbeat steady and warm in his chest. The pride he feared lost was fully restored, once again reminding him that he belonged to the great family of the Marine Corps, an indelible part of the eternal American dream of justice, freedom, and equality. That evening, as James Carter rose from the park bench to head home, the warm glow of pride still echoed in his chest. But what had happened in that alley wasn't merely a personal confrontation between him and Tyler Evans's gang, nor just a lesson for those wayward teens. The weight of the incident rippled quietly through the Maple Street neighborhood, awakening in the community a renewed sense of honor, justice, and respect for one another. Within hours, hushed whispers spread through every shop, cafe, and bakery, even into the cozy living rooms of the tree-lined street. "Did you hear? Those Evans boys got cornered by Marines in the old alley. What did they do to deserve that? I heard a veteran was shoved into the street, nearly killed. Mr. Carter? I know him. He's kind, polite, gave his whole life for this country. Nobody deserves that treatment, especially not a man like him." What began as soft murmurs soon became the neighborhood's favorite topic, then unofficial news that even spilled into adjacent blocks. In these conversations, James Carter's image shone brighter than ever. No longer just the silent old black man with a weathered cane, he'd become a symbol of resilience and dignity undefeated. Neighbors who'd known him, Dr. Daniels at the clinic, Jenny the baker, Miguel the mechanic, even passers-by who'd only exchanged nods, felt a swell of pride recalling that they knew or had spoken with Mr. Carter. Even the younger residents who once steered clear of the Evans boys now looked at James with genuine respect. Mothers told their children, "If you meet Mr. Carter on the street, be sure to say hello. He's a hero, part of our history." The kids who once treated the Evans brothers as untouchable were learning that arrogance and cruelty always meet real courage, self-respect, and community strength. The story didn't end with gossip. A few older neighbors wrote thank you letters to the Marine recruiting station, expressing gratitude for safeguarding a veteran's honor. Jenny, the baker, packed Mr. Carter a special slice of apple pie and included a note. "Thank you for reminding us what truly matters: kindness and courage." The local community council even discussed hosting a small ceremony in his honor, not just for his military service but for his unwavering stand against injustice at age 90. No one spoke of Tyler Evans and his friends with spite or retaliation. Instead, people described the teen's remorseful silence with compassion, as if chronicling a wound finally beginning to heal. Some parents of those boys came forward to apologize on their children's behalf and vowed to teach them respect and accountability. For Tyler, Billy, Brandon, Ryan, and Kevin, the days that followed were quietly different. They avoided the park, dodged curious glances, and no longer dared gather in noisy packs. Their swagger gave way to awkward hesitance. Yet, in that silence, a seed of change took root. Not fear, but reflection, an awareness of consequences, and a fledgling sense of responsibility. James Carter's story became a nightly tale in family homes, a morality lesson in the local schools, and a cornerstone of anti-bullying and anti-racism efforts across the neighborhood. A group of students even volunteered to paint a small sign at the park entrance. This area is watched over by the spirit of justice and respect. Honor Mr. Carter's example. When city officials learned of the incident, they commended the Marines for their prompt response and urged schools to incorporate Mr. Carter's story into extracurricular programs, highlighting respect for diversity and the lesson that no one, regardless of age or skin color, may be trampled. A week later, whenever James stepped outside, he was greeted on every corner. "Hello, Mr. Carter," from the children, respectful nods from elders, and warm handshakes from shopkeepers. It felt like a vast circle of solidarity encouraging him to believe in humanity's goodness once more. James Carter's aging heart stirred anew. He knew that one righteous action, one moment of unwavering courage, no matter how small, could spark a powerful wave of change, transforming an entire community from the inside out, healing deep wounds and igniting hope, justice, and human dignity. In the days after the incident, Maple Street fell into a quieter but warmer, more radiant rhythm, alive with an undercurrent of renewed trust and pride. And within that atmosphere, James Carter himself became a living symbol, not just to fellow veterans, but to anyone who'd ever felt small or overlooked, yet still held on to dignity and faith in goodness. From that day on, James's daily walks were no longer solitary. Every time he passed the Marine recruiting station, the world seemed to pause in a moment of deep respect. Even busy young Marines would stop, straighten their uniforms, and render him a solemn salute, an all too rare gesture of honor between generations. That image, a silver-haired black gentleman leaning on a weathered wooden cane, saluted beneath the stars and stripes, became one of the neighborhood's most cherished everyday scenes. Passers-by would smile or whisper to their children, "That's Mr. Carter, a true hero." And the kids, who didn't yet grasp the full story, would nonetheless give him a proud, courteous salute, feeling the special respect flowing between them and him. The Marines, each from different backgrounds and walks of life, found a shared empathy when they faced James. In their eyes shone gratitude for the path he'd paved, and a reminder that a Marine's worth lies not in brute strength or rank, but in loyalty, camaraderie, and moral courage. James didn't say much in reply, but every time he received that salute he returned it with all the solemnity and joy he could muster. The loneliness and shame that had once gnawed at his heart were now replaced by a sense of recognition and belonging. He was part of a proud tradition he'd spent his life defending. Sometimes the Marines would invite him in. They'd sit together in the station's common room, sharing coffee and stories, battlefield memories, life lessons, and small anecdotes. Sergeant Miller, in particular, treated James like a living archive, listening intently, drawing strength and inspiration from his experiences. Those gatherings bridged the community. Local youth began coming by the station, attending history talks and workshops on dignity, anti-bullying, and anti-racism. James Carter's story spread beyond Maple Street, to community meetings, school assemblies, and church bulletins. His name came to stand for standing up for what's right, and for the hope that injustice, no matter how entrenched, can be challenged by someone brave enough to say, enough. For Tyler Evans and his friends, the memory of that fateful afternoon never faded. Each time they walked past the recruiting station, they glanced over, ashamed, yet in awe. They'd catch sight of James and feel a fleeting awkwardness before respectfully nodding. A small but genuine sign that the lesson in honor and respect had taken root far more deeply than any punishment ever could. James's true reward wasn't fame or accolades, but the everyday affirmations of respect and gratitude from everyone on Maple Street, old and young, white and black alike. He realized that respect and compassion aren't luxuries, but the invisible thread that binds a community, healing the wounds left by prejudice, indifference, and injustice. Each evening, as the last light painted his long shadow on the sidewalk beside the standing young Marines, James felt himself not merely an aging veteran, but part of something grand, beautiful, and enduring. Something far greater than any battlefield triumph he'd ever known. Because sometimes the brightest example in ordinary life, one small act of standing up for dignity, can strengthen and unite an entire community, ensuring that pride and hope never fade away. Since the day James Carter became the living symbol of pride and unity, the story of that fateful afternoon on Maple Street has gradually turned into legend, passed down through generations as a lesson not just about one man, but about the moral boundaries of an entire community. Every week at the local high school, teachers revisit the incident when discussing the value of respect and one's duty to themselves and to others. Children who once feared the power of Tyler Evans's gang now understand that true honor doesn't lie in arrogance or mob strength, but in the courage to admit mistakes, in kindness, and in the resolve to stand up to injustice. In fact, the very members of Tyler's group, especially Tyler himself, have shown clear changes in attitude. At first, shame made them avoid everyone's gaze, but later, when they dared to face themselves and their neighbors, Tyler stepped up to help lead anti-bullying efforts, sharing his own experience to warn future generations. James Carter's story didn't just stay in memory. It became a living part of Maple Street's identity. At every major holiday celebration, he was invited to speak about tolerance, solidarity, and how a community can be transformed simply by someone having the courage to speak out and defend what's right. When he would say in his gentle voice, "No one has the right to look down on another because they're old, different, or have lived through hardships. We are a community when we protect one another, stand together, and respect every person." The entire square would fall silent, moved, proud, and grateful. His image was blown up across local newspapers, the humble old Marine flanked by respectful young recruits. That photograph hung in the community hall alongside stories of other veterans, a clear testament that there are moral limits no one may cross for any reason. Youthful recklessness, poverty, different skin tones, all pale in comparison to the unchanging values of human dignity and respect. Those, once seen as villains, Tyler's teen crew, grew up in the aftermath. Under the quiet guidance of James, Sergeant Miller, and the whole neighborhood, they were neither shunned nor ostracized, but given the chance to make amends and mature through their mistakes. Their story proved that remorse, the bravery to accept responsibility, and genuine compassion can touch even the hardest hearts. Later, whenever someone asked Tyler about that afternoon, he would bow his head sincerely and say, "That was the day I learned what true respect is, what lines must never be crossed." And I know I was forgiven. I was able to grow because this community didn't turn its back on me, but helped me correct myself. The impact of that event reached far beyond the block. James Carter's lesson was cited in military seminars, youth training programs, and state media. Everyone recognized that a single act of courage, a steadfast stand against injustice, even if it came from a silver-haired old man, could spark a wave of change, inspiring hundreds or thousands. Above all, the story remains a powerful reminder of the immeasurable strength of unity. It's the moment when U.S. Marines, regardless of age, race, or background, stood up to protect a comrade's honor, even one who had long since returned to civilian life. They did it not for personal glory, but because brotherhood is immutable, the greatest force any civilized society can wield, the power to safeguard each person's dignity, worth, and right to respect. Maple Street is no longer just a place of painful memories. It's a land of faith, of justice, and of hope. Whenever James Carter walks by now, his shadow stretching long in the late afternoon light beside the young Marines standing at attention. Everyone, from elders to children, from soldiers to shopkeepers, from past wrongdoers to young women coming of age, salutes him. They salute him not only for his past, but for today, for the lesson etched forever in their hearts. That story reminds us all, whoever you are, you deserve respect. Never stay silent in the face of injustice. And remember, once someone dares to speak up, an entire community can rediscover its moral compass, reclaim its pride, and build a new generation that never bows its head. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to hit like, share it with friends, and subscribe for more uplifting, inspiring tales every week.